Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. So can you guys hear me? Yes? Okay, good. So thank you to the High Silicon team and IBC for inviting us. I hope you guys are as excited as I am to get into a new IBC this year. So everybody excited? Oh, wow, you guys are really excited. That's really impressive. Okay, maybe I'll start with a show of hands. So who knows Irdeto? That is not as much as I was expecting, because this year we're actually celebrating 50 years. So I think a lot of people know us. We are a leading security provider in the media space, as well as a few other industries, supporting basically pay TV operators, OTT providers around the world, securing their networks, making sure that ultimately they can monetize their content. But today I'm not actually going to talk specifically about Irdeto. I'm actually going to talk about the industry and what we're doing and what we should be doing from a security perspective, reflecting a little bit on 4K and the experience that we have and what we need to think about when we move into 8K. So, So if you look at 4K first, from a market perspective, it's been fueled by the growth on the OTT front. The adoption in pay TV broadcast hasn't been that material yet. It's just starting this year, really. And there's reasons for that are mostly around distribution cost for the operators, as well as obviously renewal of set-top boxes and things like that. But we do anticipate, of course, 4K to grow more and more, which will then start actually putting some stepping stones for 8K. So, continue to think a little bit about how new resolutions, new types of content gets introduced. There's typically release cycles, and it's trickling down from the theaters right up to the other side of the distribution chain. There's usually distribution from the theater to typically the airlines, the airplanes, up to the physical retailers, and then it goes into OTT and eventually on TV. And so that trickle feeds slowly. As you go down that path, it becomes less and less variable, so there's less and less protection that's applied. But protection remains quite important. It remains, I'd say, even vital, because that's where, for me, that there's a big shocker, because if you look at piracy today, it's a tremendous problem for the industry. Many operators, I'd say, at least in mature markets, are actually maturing. They are actually having challenges to retain customers, and part of it is because of piracy. So if you look some of the stats, and some of them are staggering. Almost 25% of all traffic of the internet is actually pirated content. Let that one sink. And then probably another half is porn, but we'll talk about that later. Look at some of the other ones. So Game of Thrones Season 8 was downloaded 55 million times in 24 hours. Think about the loss of revenue associated with that operators and HBO could have made, should they have protected it correctly. Same thing for the World Cup. So last year, World Cup, that ended up being pirated by 6 million people, and that is just on social media. So you start to grasp that there is a bit of a problem in the industry at the moment. Again, 52% of the consumers watch pirated content. So if you look left or right, it's very likely that at least one of your peers sitting next to you are actually watching pirated content. And in fairness, there's the pirated content is fairly well developed these days. It looks great. The user interfaces are actually fantastic, as good as the operators. It's a business these days. And so as an industry, we do need to respond to that, to prepare for that, and make sure that we can, as an industry, continue to evolve, continue to be able to invest into new content, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you look at the history a little bit, and again, it's about reflecting on these things. And so starting from HD, so, the 2010, 2011-ish, is kind of where we started stepping a little bit the game from a piracy perspective. And let me add that. So that's where we started introducing what we call hardware root of trust or secure chipsets, which high silicon, for example, does. First generation, this was intended to try and fight against what at the time was a major issue, which was card sharing and controller sharing. So we've taken that away by introducing some major technologies as we move from SD to HD. Then when 4K came along, we improved significantly. The security levels are actually a lot better today than they were, say, 8 years ago. And that's natural, of course. As people invest into technology, things get better. So I think today we talk a little bit about second generation or even third generations of hardware root of trust. Linked to that also was introduced some evolution of HDCP, which is the protection that's applied to HDMI, as well as watermarking. So that really was introduced with the intent of trying to fight the current challenge, which is content redistribution. So why is there so much pirated content that's being watched? That's because it's available. Why is it available? It's because people are stealing it typically through the HDMI port. So some of the things we're going to need to do as an industry is actually do better to start actually stopping this challenge, right? And content redistribution is a major issue. There's a few other issues as well in the industry, including, for example, password sharing, which is a challenge for some operators. But ultimately, I think right now the biggest challenge is content redistribution. What's, however, interesting when, again, reflecting a little bit as an industry is that Movie Labs defined a very good standard. Included hardware root of trust, very good, very strong encryption, secure media pipeline, which was a total nightmare for all the chipset vendors to implement because it was so strong and so hard to manage. But for the better good of the industry, it was important to have. Even the CA and DRM had some improved requirements to make it even harder to attack. Even included things like certifications to make sure that things not only said they did it right, but also implemented it right. Also including watermarking. So on paper, it looks like all the elements were there. But here's the problem. Ultimately, it hasn't been really rolled out. And if you look today, the usage of watermarking is extremely low. And that's extremely worrying as you think of 8K, where the cost of production, the cost of distribution is continuing to increase as it did between HD and say 4K. So there is significant investment that are at stake that need to be protected. And as an industry, we kind of failed on 4K by inventing and implementing all these cool technologies that we never enabled. So for me, that's the biggest fail, and that's where we as an industry need to do better as we move to 8K. Because the realization in general is that as you move to new resolutions, new codecs, HDR, all these things, this is an opportunity to change the hardware. As you change the hardware, that's an opportunity to step up the game from a security perspective. And that's obviously a security vendor thinking of it, but that's the opportunity. And either you decide to step up the game, or you accept that you continue as it was, and therefore you're not improving the situation. So for me, that's the biggest challenge. So in terms of recommendation, there is no silver bullet. And let's be all clear and honest about the fact that ultimately piracy will always exist. It is kind of a cat and mouse game. Pirates will become smarter, so will the security vendors, and will be there to continue to improve, invest, and fight and be ahead. But ultimately, that can only work if all the technologies are activated and enabled. And for me, for example, if you start on the left, sorry, on the right, so the use of watermarking is, in my opinion, very critical, because this is what enables tracing who actually pirated content. Being able to trace the individual user, the individual subscriber, and be able to go and actually after the people and basically stop the leak. Having that technology in all set-top boxes, people knowing that it is there, would discourage very strongly people from pirating going forward because they knew they'd be able to be caught ultimately. Key element, and that's been part of Edito's kind of culture all along with even in the smart card days and of course in the software days, having renewable technologies so that you can actually respond to any issues is of course a high recommendation. But also, I'd say part of the recommendation as we spec the 8K requirements, there needs to be a lot of strong security that's implemented from screen to screen. And that does go up to HDMI, for example, that's currently challenged to remain secure. But of course, there's things in between, including, for example, in a broadcast network having the usage of AES or CSA3 rather than CSA2. That's maybe not as strong as it needs to be going forward. And of course, ensuring that you implement the right security in the set-top boxes, in the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, that's the recommendation. Again, it's not an Edeto thing. This is actually, as an industry, we are challenged with security. There is a lot of piracy happening. And the only way for our customers to continue to grow, to be successful, is to take away that pain and ultimately support them. And that's actually an industry effort. It's not one single vendor that can actually achieve that. And that is it. Thank you very much.